This program is about cancer and the caregiver. After completing this lesson, you will be able to identify 3 common reactions the patient with cancer may experience. List 1 strategy you can use to deal with each reaction. Describe the roles of hope and denial in coping with cancer. And identify 2 ways the caregiver can cope with caring for the patient with cancer.
Cancer. The very mention of the word arouses deep feelings and emotions in just about every human being. The person with cancer faces many uncertainties in diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. The patient has many fears. Fear of death, fear that he may develop chronic, intractable pain, be disfigured, or suffer side effects of therapy. The patient may lose his job, financial security, the love of others, even his very independence. With current advances in technology, many cancer patients are cured or living longer. So cancer can now be considered a chronic disease, albeit one with significant impact, and which can cause major disruption of a person's life. Yet through all of this, the patient must cope and carry on with life. But the patient does not go through these experiences alone. He is not alone in the need to cope with all the difficulties. The caregiver is very involved in all the processes. The caregiver shares the uncertainty, feels the pain and suffering, and bears the brunt of the anger. As a caregiver, you are called upon to support the patient, to facilitate the treatment, and most of all, to help the patient cope with all the changes and havoc they create. This program is dedicated to you, the very important caregiver. We will focus on your role as we discuss the patient's reactions, fears, and needs. We will talk about strategies to help you and the patient cope with the cancer. People with cancer often say that you don't know what it is like until you have it. And so it is with caregivers. You do not know what it is like to care for the patient with cancer until you have done it. Today we will look at caregiving through the experiences and expertise of 3 caregivers from the VNA Community Hospice in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Margaret Hansen, a registered nurse, Heidi Bader, a volunteer, and Fern Gardner, a home health aide. We will share their ideas and strategies and learn how to face the challenges of caring for the patient with cancer. As a caregiver, your first important role is to assist the patient to meet his or her physical needs and to support the medical treatment plan. There are as many different treatments and plans as there are patients. So take the time to discuss the plan for your patient and understand clearly what your role is. Then it becomes important to help the person cope with cancer. We cope with problems and changes every day of our life. We learn to adapt when we are caught in a traffic jam or sitting in the dentist's chair. We cope with the flu and bad weather. Coping is an ongoing effort to make sense of what is happening, to take the actions necessary to resolve problems, and to carry on with life in the best way possible. And as caregivers, we must do what we can to help the patient cope with cancer. Helping the person cope with cancer is not an easy task. The person faces a multitude of changes in health, lifestyle, and relationships. Coping is complicated by the individual and his personal characteristics, the way he reacts, how he has coped with difficulties in the past, available support systems, and more. As you care for your patients, you must remember that this individuality is important. There is no one way a person will respond to anything.
This is an individual. This patient is an individual. He's unlike no other person that we've encountered, and the family situation too.
No matter what you face, you must remember that sensitivity to the uniqueness of the patient situation is essential. Even though every situation is unique, it is helpful if you have an understanding of some of the more common patient responses and reactions you may experience. When first diagnosed with cancer, and throughout the various courses of the disease, the patient experiences fear and anxiety. Fear is a response to threats that we know about. The person with cancer knows he will lose time from work. Anxiety is general uneasiness, a response to unknown threats. He doesn't know what is around the next corner.
I think one of the first feelings is a real sense of uncertainty and fear. What does this mean? I think we all want to be in control, and I've experienced a lot of patients losing that control and not knowing what's going to come next and wanting to have that. And that being very unsettling, not knowing what's going to be possible, what treatment is there, is this going to hurt, is my family going to stay with me, or what are all the consequences, am I going to lose my job? And in regard to terminal illness, how long is this going to take? Is it going to hurt?
The first way to deal with any emotion is to know that it exists.
Being able to label it, to talk about what their fears actually are, and sometimes just being able to name those fears and get them out so that they can be examined, that's the beginning. And then trying to deal with them maybe one at a time, and as a caregiver, trying to address those issues in regard to their specific case and whether or not it's something they need to be afraid of.
Once we have identified the emotion, then we can deal with it. Often the patient will seek information to help him cope. Through knowledge, the patient feels more in control and has some idea of what to expect. Assist your patient to obtain information.
The agency I work for, VNA, has a lot of books, and they give the caretakers pamphlets and booklets to read so that they have a little understanding of what the patient is going through.
Trying to prepare patients and families on what they can expect in regard to treatments, what they can expect as far as what the cancer may be like, how it progresses, if we know that much about it.
As your patient seeks information and asks questions, support him. See that the questions are answered. But never use your personal experiences, what happened to your relative with cancer, as a way to educate the patient.
No two people live the same way. No two people react to having a diagnosis of cancer, react to a terminal illness in the same way. We are all very different.
There are two specific fears many persons with cancer share. There is the fear of addiction to the pain-killing or narcotic medications, like morphine. This fear can be so strong that the patient or family will deny the pain or choose not to use the medication.
A lot of them don't want to accept the fact that they do have pain. They want to just go on. And you can see sometimes in their actions or their face that they are in pain, but they don't want to admit it.
And patients say, I don't want to take the pain medicine until it gets so bad. And so they wait sometimes too long.
I've seen family members be concerned with addiction as far as medications. Many times they're very, very reluctant to give them certain medications, especially those like morphine.
The patient's need for the pain medication is genuine and real.
Patients have a reason to have pain, and they need something to take away the pain, and they're taking it for those reasons.
And as the cancer progresses, the patient may need to take increasing amounts of medication, and that is necessary.
And when patients are terminally ill, the amount of medicines that they sometimes need to take are beyond what other people might be addicted to, and yet that's what they need.
As caregivers, we must realize that when pain is controlled, the patient can eat, sleep, and carry on with daily activities. We can help our patients and families to realize that pain medication is essential for the patient to make the most of his daily life.
I try and encourage patients to take the medicines that they need without fostering the addiction.
A lot of times it's just a process of re-educating the family members that this is necessary. Pain medication is necessary in order to make the person comfortable. If they're to have any really quality life, that they need to be pain-free, and that the morphine is, or the other pain medication is just a means to achieve that.
There is another fear that many cancer patients share.
The main fear of a patient is to be alone, to face this cancer diagnosis alone, or to face the possibility of dying alone.
Loved ones and friends tend to stay away because they cannot cope with what is happening.
And there are times when patients really feel hurt when their friends don't support them. And that may be because the friend isn't able to cope with what's going on, how the person has changed. And that's real sad. The patient does feel abandoned then, and that's sad.
The patient with cancer often has just one simple wish.
The family doesn't realize sometimes that they give them their food and they just put it in a room and let them eat. They like to have somebody to talk to.
And you may be that person who is there to listen.
I would tell a new nurse or someone with a VNA or a new health professional, if they're working with someone with cancer patients, not to be afraid to be human, not to be afraid to touch that patient or that family member, to really care about them.
Call into play all your best communication skills, both verbal and nonverbal. It is not so important what you say, but that you listen. Be caring, sensitive, and non-judgmental. The person with cancer struggles to make sense of what is happening. The person may feel singled out for his unjust treatment. Often the why it happened cannot be answered, and this can create strong emotions.
They may be very angry and hostile and very uncooperative.
There is the hostility we see oftentimes coming out of both the patient and the family. There's anger. Why did this have to happen to me? Recently, one woman was telling me how mad she was at God. She had just pretty much stopped talking to God. She said, I worked hard, I prayed, I lived good. Why is this happening to me? And she was really angry. And so she was so angry she wasn't going to continue talking to him.
And besides struggling with why me, there are many things that do not go as planned.
They're angry about what's going on, and so when something goes wrong or they don't agree with what you're telling you, you can just sense the anger and the hostility toward you, toward me as a nurse, or toward the doctor, or toward the healthcare system. And I think it's so often that things go wrong for patients. You know, the treatments didn't work out, or medical records didn't get sent, and things go wrong, that there's a lot of things to be angry about, in addition to the fact that they have cancer.
Being on the receiving end of anger puts the caregiver in a very difficult position.
In the beginning, it is very hard to deal with someone that is venting anger towards you. You tend to take it very personally and get very defensive.
I don't like anybody getting angry at me, and I think humanly there's a tendency to want to pull back from patients or families when they get angry at you.
It's very difficult when someone is angry to be engaged with them and to talk with them and to try and care for them. It really does take some experience knowing where that anger is coming from before you can really understand it and then be willing to put up with it.
No matter how difficult it may be, do not respond back to the patient in anger. As a caregiver, you must learn to control your emotions, to be like a lightning rod and absorb the bolts of anger.
For myself, I have to remember that that's not going to help them if I pull back, because they're already afraid of being deserted. And so to just keep trying to be present to them when they are angry, trying to address their anger and find out what's behind the anger, and to not return the anger or the coldness back to them.
I try to look behind that anger and find out what is really going on. I believe it's important for the patient and the family members to acknowledge that they do have anger and to allow them to express it.
As members of a caregiving team, we must also support each other in dealing with the emotions created by the patient's anger.
I think trying to inform, like a nurse's aide or a home health aide, that the patient is angry and that it's not at them, and for them to not, and to try and encourage that aide to not take it personally.
Sometimes the fears, anxiety, pain, and all the changes can be too much for the patient to bear, leading to depression. There are times the patient feels the need to cry. But even though depression and weeping are normal human responses, family and caregivers look upon these as bad responses.
Oftentimes, when patients cry, their family, you'll see them say, "Not now," or, we don't want to upset the patient, and so they try and change the subject or cover it up or tell them, to be strong.
Many times, the families are having great difficulty coping. The pain that leads the patient to cry tears deeply at them.
When a patient is very depressed or crying, most of the time I see families that are really hurting deeply. They really don't know what to do for the patient who is crying and being depressed.
Often, telling the patient to be strong or to cheer up is the family's way of dealing with their pain or embarrassment. It is their attempt to deny what is happening and to feel better. We must recognize, however, that since crying can be a normal response, the patient should not be made to feel uncomfortable or embarrassed.
When one elderly woman was dying, she was very terminally ill with a cancer, and her granddaughter had walked in while she was crying, while I was talking to her, and the granddaughter said, "Grandma, no, don't do that, not now, you can be strong," and tried to change the conversation. And at that point, I tried to say she really needs to get it out. This is really sad, and this is hard, and it's normal to cry, and it's okay.
The patient is not looking for anyone to make the world perfect or to take all the problems away. It is important to be there, to listen, to care.
A lot of times what that patient is really wanting is someone to be with. Maybe not to make things better, but just to sit with them and cry with them or hold their hand.
I usually just give them a hug or hold their hand and talk to them, and then they get over it, and then they're okay.
Denial is another way people cope with the difficulties of cancer. Denial is the act of selectively negating or nullifying a threat.
I'm thinking of one man in particular who, through his entire time with our hospice program, was experiencing denial. He had been through many difficulties in his entire life and had overcome them, and he thought this was just one more difficulty he was going to overcome. And despite all the medical evidence and the way he was feeling, his physical condition, he still believed he was getting better. And he maintained that throughout his entire illness until he died. Deep down, I really think he knew what was happening to him and that he would die. But to him, giving up that denial was giving up hope.
I think denial in regard to cancer it can be a healthy, natural response.
Not everyone can cope with knowing that they have cancer 100 times, 100% of the day. It's a lot to ask of a person to be able to face that reality all the time. Denial isn't necessarily bad. It just means that that person can't cope at that moment. A lot of times it is a necessary type of defense for them.
To some extent, we need to soften the reality of cancer and or of a terminal illness that we don't always have to have it right up in front of us. And so for moments in time, we can forget about it. Patients, even though they may be very terminally ill, will talk about what's going to happen next summer or sometime, and in their heart or in the past, they've already expressed that they're not going to be around then. And so talking about the vacation that they're going to take is in some way denying that they're really that terminally ill. And yet they need to be able to hope for a little bit of that too, and to deny it sometimes just to be able to cope with it.
A measure of healthy, adaptive denial is necessary for the patient. It is not always something that we need to attack.
A lot of times we have to, as caregivers, realize that they may be experiencing denial now, and not to necessarily push that away or demand that the patient give that up.
However, there are times that denial is not healthy. In those instances, denial is not a satisfactory way of coping with the situation.
They deny, they want to keep going on with everyday life and do all the things they want that they did before, and they don't want to accept any help.
I think it would be necessary to really confront denial. When a patient is maintaining that denial so fervently that maybe he is dying, maybe he does need to have taken care of some unfinished business, maybe he needs to talk to his family members and really tell them how he feels about them if he is dying. There may be some things that can't wait. You can't wait till next week or next month for him to give up his denial.
When denial does interfere with a patient's treatment or life, it is not easy for the caregiver to intervene. It takes patience, tact, and understanding to help the patient get a perspective on reality.
That may be a time when you want to intervene more directly, but maybe in a more caring way rather than demanding that the patient look at it, just suggesting to them that this may be a good time for them to look at what's happening to them and what they maybe would like to do before it's too late.
As a nurse coming into a situation like that, I may see something as, this is the reality, this is what's happening, you're going to have to face this and let's go on. And I think as a caregiver, I need to step back and understand what they're seeing as real and listening to what it is that they're experiencing, and then try and somewhere in the middle get them to deal with what I'm seeing as reality.
As we care for the patient with cancer, it is essential that we help him maintain hope.
Hope in regard to cancer is a real strength and is a real important part of treatment. I think people need to be able to hope.
Patients will hope for different things.
Some of the families are like that. They think that with the new things and the new medication and with the care that maybe they will get better.
And their hopes will change from day to day as their situation changes.
At first, it may be hope as a chance of, I will overcome this and I will survive. That may be the first type of hope that a person may have. Basically, I believe the hope changes for patients, especially in the hospice program. Their hopes may change to include hope to be pain-free, hope to have a good quality of life, to do the things that they always like to do, hope that maybe they'll make an event, a special event a month from now, that they'll be alive at that time.
But no matter what they hope for, that hope is essential. Do what you can within your power to support the patient's hopes.
I try to support a patient's hope by working from where they're at, from their perspective. If they're hoping that they will recover, I try and support that and hope that they will recover also, too. I try not to falsely encourage them, but I try to support their hopes.
When you are faced with serious questions about diagnosis, prognosis, or treatment, however, do not mislead the patient. There are no right answers.
One day when I was giving her a bath, she asked me if I knew when she was going to die. And I had never had that put before me, and I didn't really know what to say. I had to think a while. And then I said to her that the only one that knows when you're going to die is God, that He will know when your time is up.
With tact, compassion, and straightforward answers and information, you help the patient maintain an environment of hope. Hopeful people set goals. People with hope try to resolve conflicts. They seek answers to their problems. They cooperate with the treatment plan.
One woman had told me that she had hoped for and asked for 5 years, and that actually happened for her. In fact, she has more than 5 years. She's right now very terminally ill, but that's what she wanted, and she could put that into words. And I think back then that hope that she would be better for that amount of time helped her to make it that far.
It is important to remember that you cannot be everything your patient needs. Help your patients seek out and use support groups.
Some of the family members do take advantage of the support groups, and it really helps them to cope with what they have at home and helps them that they don't get so stressed out. And they see that there's other people that are sharing in the same thing, and they can exchange ideas on how they're coping with this.
I'm a real advocate of support groups. I feel there's something to be said for being with another person that may have cancer when you have cancer yourself.
Try to identify other support systems your patient may have.
I see families getting support and patients getting support within their close friends, the circle of their friends, with the consistency of caregivers. A lot of patients really have grown close to their doctors and the clinic nurses, and then us, we nurses as well, and the home health aides.
And in talking about support, let's not forget about you, the caregiver. Caring for the cancer patient is not always an easy or painless assignment.
When you become personally involved, you do set yourself up for some risks. You can get very attached to the patients and the families. You can come home after work, and really it is hard to take your mind off of these people when you know they're experiencing so much pain.
As a caregiver, you experience many of the same emotions as the patient.
I was at one family's home, and the patient was very bad, and they had called the priest to give him the last rites, and the family wanted everybody to be in there, which included me, and we are all in there in a circle holding hands. And as he was doing it, I looked around the room, and I was the only one that had tears running down my eyes. And I went to the clergy at VNA and asked him, and why, I felt so bad about it. And he says, that's the way it should be.
Just recently, one of my patients and families that I've been working with a patient was near death, and I received a phone call that the patient was actively dying and that the family would like me there. I really did have some mixed feelings about that. I really wanted to be there to be supportive, and yet I knew it was going to be very painful. And there's part of me that immediately wanted to go, and a part of me that didn't. And I chose to go, and I was there, and the patient was gasping and was actively dying. The family members were distraught, to say the least. I went, we held hands, we each said our goodbyes to the person. We cried, I cried. I really didn't do much more than just be there, and I think that was really the important thing. And the family members, I think it just felt good to have someone there with them.
You, too, must learn to cope with the situations created by the cancer. You must learn to deal with emotions and carry on with everyday life as a caregiver. And that coping process for the caregiver begins with recognition of those feelings. Once they are out in the open, you can deal with them.
That's one thing the nurses say, that's good that you can cry with them.
We have to let others know how we feel. We have to be able to name what it is that we're feeling in certain situations so that we can begin to deal with it too.
Then, look for support for you. Sharing your emotions and concerns makes it easier to hold up through difficult situations. You will probably find that support is available within your agency.
There are many ways I find support. I find working with a team, as in my case, as a volunteer or other staff member. We do have a team that meets. We get a lot of feedback and support from them. Someone that you can talk to, someone you can trust, someone that you can share your feelings with and not be judged.
We all share ideas. Social workers and a chaplain and all the nurses are there, and we all share ideas on what we do to take care of them and what we do to help them more.
Remember that you, too, have limits. You cannot be the super caregiver every minute of every day.
Sometimes we may need to pull back from certain patients, and other people step in and be the stronger person in a certain situation. I'm not always the best person to deal with this or that particular problem, and realizing that somebody else may be better at that, and so letting go and letting somebody else take over.
Know what your limits are Know what kind of patients you really can't work with, if they're too similar to something. If you've experienced the loss of a parent or a child, maybe it's not a good idea to take care of another patient or family member that's going to remind you too much of what you've experienced. Working with those young children a lot of times are very hard for caregivers to handle. They know that they really can't deal with that, and it's good to know that, and it's okay to have limits. And as far as family members too, to know what the limits are. You can't do it all. You can try as hard as you can to make the patient comfortable, but there are times when you need to do for yourself, and not to feel guilty about that, and to seek out the help when you need it.
Now that we have learned from the experiences of these caregivers, let's apply that information to you. How can you assist the patient with cancer who is experiencing fear, anger, depression? Why does a patient with cancer use denial? When should a caregiver assist the patient to confront the denial? What role does hope play in the cancer patient's life? What strategies can you, as a caregiver, employ to cope with caring for the patient with cancer? As a caregiver, you wish you could take away the pain, ease the suffering, and make the world better for the patient with cancer. But you can't. Sometimes you can only be there.
Being there to talk to them and listen to their not problems, maybe their fears.
I think the greatest advice to give to caregivers in being able to cope is to take things just one day at a time, one little step, and to cope with that, what's happening today. I often say, just hang in there for today and deal with that little part first.
And it's just not always possible. And the greatest good we can really do is to be with that person, to cry with them, to hold their hand, to listen is real important. Just to be there, that our really great value comes from ourselves and from really being with the person and really sharing things with them.
Remember, to the patient with cancer, you, the caregiver, are very important. Be there, be caring, and listen.